I am very happy indeed of this opportunity to talk to you. In these troubled days, when the Federal Service and the nation which it is designed to serve both face such critical problems, it is more than ever necessary for us to see ourselves and our organization in the perspective which time alone affords. Therefore, I want to tell you something about the way the National Federation of Federal Employees was created, how and why it came into being as an organization of, by, and for federal employees, and some of the intimate background of the conditions which prevailed in the Federal Service when the NFFE began its great task. I want to tell you this for several reasons. All of us who are members of our organization should have an accurate understanding of its background. Only by understanding the past can we plan and work soundly and with effective purpose for the future. History is important, not in and of itself, but as a guide for the present and the future. And a record such as ours, a record of initiative and intelligence, of pioneering and of continuing leadership, of careful planning and proved accomplishment, all of this is your best assurance, and the best assurance for all federal employees, members and non-members alike, that the National Federation of Federal Employees will go on leading the way to new goals now and in the years to come. Let us look back to the year 1916. That was not a happy time for federal employees. The war in Europe had been raging for a year and a half. The cost of living in the United States had gone up by leaps and bounds. By 1916, it appeared that our country was headed for world conflict. Congress, the President, and his administrators all were preoccupied with preparation. Many segments of the American economy had profited by the situation, and many workers had been granted wage increases. Forgotten, however, were federal employees, completely forgotten. Of course, it is true they had been given some attention as to compensation, while only 62 years prior to that date, in 1854, the Congress of the United States established pay rates. Clerks of classes 1, 2, 3, and 4 at $1,200, $1,400, $1,600, and $1,800 a year. But then a few years later, feeling that the outburst of generosity of 1854 should be tempered, they provided certain subrates below $1,200, so that the staggering sum of $100 a month would not be thrust into the hands of just any newcomer in the federal service. A civil service law providing a competitive system for entrance into the federal service was enacted in 1883, but large areas of the service were exempted. There was a vague, haphazard, and crude classification, which was to a great extent meaningless. There were some entrance examinations, but they did not add up to much, and the spoils system remained rampant. At the same time, the Civil Service Commission had recruiting functions only. It shied away from any others. To indicate the attitude of many members of Congress toward the federal service, a bill which almost became a law so recently as 1910 may be cited. It would have fixed a 7-year limit on the tenure of office of all employees. You would be surprised and shocked to know how much support an out-and-out spoils measure like that could muster so recently as 4 decades ago. For many years, federal employees had been talking about a retirement system, but it was talk only, and congressional opinion ranged from indifference to anger that federal employees should even consider so radical an idea. You who do not remember a federal service without a retirement system may find it difficult to picture the conditions which actually existed prior to 1920, when, less than 3 years after the formation of the NFFE, we were able to secure enactment of the first retirement law. Employees, for the most part, were unable to put anything by for their old age because of the meagerness of their pay. When faithful and competent employees reached a point where they simply could not carry on, either because of age or physical disabilities, administrators could do one of two things. They could either throw them out into the streets to become objects of private or public charity, or they could, by subterfuge, keep them on the payroll. There were no more heartbreaking sights in those days than to see employees being brought in on wheelchairs, or led by the hand, or carried or dragged in to an obscure desk or chair, there to remain until called for. Such a situation was inhumane in the extreme, of course, but it was more than that. It was bad business for the government and for the taxpayers, a vital fact which the National Federation of Federal Employees emphasized from the outset. Then, back in the administration of President Theodore Roosevelt, the infamous gag order was issued, and it was reissued and given even more teeth in President Taft's administration. You will be interested, in the light of the formation of the NFFE in 1917, and our progress down through the years to the present, just what that order meant. It provided that no federal employee might complain about his conditions of employment or ask improvement or change of the conditions, excepting to the immediate superior officer through official channels. Anyone going outside to make complaint or to suggest improvements or changes in laws or regulations for themselves or for their fellow employees would be subject to summary dismissal. And I may say that there were dismissals under that obnoxious law. As the early years of this century wore on, conditions in the Federal Service got steadily worse. For example, overtime, which was not paid for in any way, became an increasingly serious problem. Let me cite you an instance. You may find it hard to believe, but it is true and I can vouch for it. It happened to me. In the department in which I was serving in 1907, we were short-handed. The secretary, who enjoyed a nationwide reputation as a philanthropist and humanitarian, issued individual letters to each person in the department, evidently to legalize his position and discourage complaints about what he proposed to do. What he planned was simply this. He said that we were paid on an annual basis, which, according to his interpretation, meant that we were on duty constantly, subject to any call. Therefore, in advance, he was approving of any hours of work that might be assigned, and that employees were being fully compensated even though they had to work 24 hours of every day. It sounds incredible, doesn't it? You think it couldn't happen. Well, it did, just 10 years before the National Federation of Federal Employees was organized. Advancement, even of the most modest kind in those days, came with painful slowness. Two types of positions existed. In most cases, Congress wrote into the statute the number of positions to be in a unit and designated the pay. There just was no possible way for an employee within that schedule to advance in pay unless there was a vacancy above, due to death, dismissal, or resignation. Then there was the problem of the so-called lump sum. Some departments, without any sound reason at all, were granted lump sums, out of which the departmental head could create positions and assign them titles without any regard to duties performed, and to fix pay. As might be imagined, this created a morale-shattering situation. In one office there might be 3 statutory employees, without hope for advancement except by death or resignation, and 3 others doing exactly the same kind of work, but getting as much as 100% more because they were paid from the favored lump sum.